the 14th Amendment is a somewhat complex topic, so let's talk about it a little bit. First of all, you should know that when the Constitution was originally written, there was a great concern for states' rights. States' rights were very important to the framers of the Constitution and to the states for agreeing to join in this United States, okay? And so when the Constitution was written, states' rights were kind of foremost in people's minds. Look at the 10th Amendment and you'll see that it specifically addresses states' rights. However, the Civil War basically was kind of the extreme in states' rights, where some of the states actually fought against the other states, and essentially it was pushing states' rights to the point where it wasn't as popular of a concept anymore. All right, and so after the Civil War, states' rights were much less kind of glorified, I guess, for lack of a better term, and so the Civil War ends, and the 13th Amendment is passed, which outlaws slavery. But it wasn't like flipping a switch. There were still people that wanted to keep slaves or descendants of slaves, or former slaves, I should say, and their descendants in a different class from non-slaves, people who had never been slaves. And that wasn't going to work. And so the government passed the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment was supposed to bring those states into line. Now notice I said states. Remember that the original Constitution largely, really almost completely, applies to the U.S. government, the federal government. All right? So the 14th Amendment is really different because it doesn't apply to the federal government. It applies to the states. So it's telling the states what to do. And so the 14th Amendment has 4 clauses, all right? The Citizenship Clause, the Privileges and Immunities Clause, the Due Process Clause, and the Equal Protection Clause. And they all kind of say the same thing. It's kind of like, to me, it's like the drafters of the 14th Amendment were kind of saying, look, do we have to draw you a picture? There's gonna be an end to, slavery's over, and there's gonna be an end to discrimination based on slavery. So I don't care if someone was a slave or his or her father or grandfather was a slave. It doesn't make a difference. They're going to be treated the same as someone who was never a slave and whose whose ancestors were never slaves. So the Citizenship Clause broadly defines citizenship and basically says if you're born here or naturalized, you're a citizen, period. The Privileges and Immunities Clause basically says for citizens, you get all the privileges and immunities. So it's not like some citizens get some citizens get more, some get less, all right? The Due Process Clause is just like the Due Process Clause in the 5th Amendment. In fact, if you look at the 5th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, you'll see that that language is almost identical. The only difference is the 14th Amendment specifically says the states, because remember that's the focus here, getting the states to come into line. So the Due Process Clause specifically says that the states have to afford due process, which if you remember from our other conversations, due process means procedural fairness, all right? And finally, the Equal Protection Clause says that all of these citizens are entitled to, or all people are entitled to equal protection of the laws under the U.S. Constitution, all right? So that's the 14th Amendment, and that's how it breaks down.